It was an ordinary evening, one that started like any other. Sarah had been cleaning the house all day, the faint scent of fresh laundry still hanging in the air. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic sound of her mop moving across the floor. She took great pride in her work, making sure everything was spotless. Every corner of the house was attended to, every dish in its place. It wasn't just the home she maintained, but the life she had built for herself and her son, John. As a single mother, Sarah had always worked tirelessly, from early mornings cleaning offices to late nights doing laundry for others. She did it all. She had never complained, never let on how exhausting it was, because all she cared about was providing for John. She wanted him to have everything she didn't have growing up. She dreamed of him becoming someone important, someone who could stand on his own and be proud of where he came from. She imagined him in a suit, perhaps a lawyer or a doctor, having the kind of life that could offer comfort and success. But to her, he was always more than just the future he could build. He was the child she had raised with her whole heart. But that evening, as she prepared dinner, her son's words shattered everything she had worked for. "Mom, I don't want—" "You there," John said, his voice sharp as he stood in the doorway of the kitchen, looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It was not the face of the boy she had raised, but the face of someone unfamiliar. Sarah turned from the stove, her heart catching in her throat. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, trying to steady her breath, not understanding what he was saying. "I mean," John continued, his tone colder than she had ever heard, "you're just a cleaner. You don't deserve to be at my wedding." Her heart stopped. The words hung in the air, heavy with a weight she couldn't comprehend. Just a cleaner. The words echoed through her mind, cutting deep. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stare at him, trying to make sense of the young man standing in front of her. The child she had raised with love and sacrifice, the one who had once run to her for comfort when he scraped his knee, now looked at her with disdain. She had spent years doing everything for him. She had spent countless hours cleaning homes, waiting tables, and even missing her own life's milestones to ensure John could attend the best schools, have the nicest clothes, and experience the things she never had. She thought he understood. She thought he knew how hard she worked to give him the life he had. She had been his world, his protector. But in that moment, she felt as though he had erased everything she had done. The years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the endless hours of hard work, all reduced to nothing. "John, I've always been here for you," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've given up so much to make sure you had what you needed. I've always supported you." John looked away, his eyes filled with frustration and something else she couldn't understand. "I'm getting married now, and I don't need you there," he said dismissively. "You're just a cleaner. You don't belong in that world." The words stung more than she could have imagined. They weren't just about her work. They were a condemnation of everything she had done for him, every sacrifice, every moment of her life dedicated to his happiness. For the first time in years, she felt completely invisible to him. He didn't see the woman who had loved him unconditionally, the mother who had poured her soul into raising him. All he saw was the cleaner, the woman who worked with her hands, the one who had no place in the life he was now building. Sarah stood there, frozen, feeling like she had been hit by a truck. Her mind raced, trying to find the words to express what she was feeling, but nothing came out. It was as if the very foundation of their relationship had crumbled in an instant. She turned away, not wanting him to see the tears that were beginning to form in her eyes. "I'll leave you to your dinner," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. As she walked away, her chest tight with the pain of rejection, she couldn't help but think about the future. She had hoped that this day would be a celebration of their relationship, a moment to share in his happiness. But instead, she had been shut out, reduced to nothing more than a memory of what she used to be to him. The silence that followed was deafening, and Sarah's heart broke. She had given him everything, but in that moment, it felt like it had never been enough. Sarah spent the following days in a daze, her mind replaying the conversation with John over and over. The words he had spoken echoed relentlessly, each repetition cutting deeper into her soul. She had never imagined that her own son, the boy she had raised with love and care, would dismiss her so easily. She had always believed that family was supposed to be a safe haven, a place where unconditional love flourished. But now, it felt as though the very foundation of her relationship with John was built on shaky ground, ready to collapse at any moment. The house, which had always been her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of the life they had once shared. The kitchen, where she had cooked his favorite meals. The living room, where they had spent countless hours watching TV and laughing together. The hallway, lined with family photos of their happiest moments. Each memory now stung, like a fresh wound that refused to heal. Sarah couldn't escape the weight of the rejection. She had always been proud of the life she had built for John. She wasn't rich, but she had worked hard to make sure he had everything he needed. She had sacrificed her own happiness to ensure his. Every job she took, every late night she spent cleaning someone else's house, every moment she put her own life on hold, it had all been for him. She had dreamed of seeing him graduate, seeing him marry, and watching him live a successful life. But now, it seemed as though her sacrifices were meaningless. In the silence of the house, Sarah found herself reflecting on everything she had done for John. She thought back to the early days, when he was just a little boy. She remembered his first steps, his first words, the way he would run to her with open arms when he was scared. She had always been there for him, guiding him, supporting him, even when it meant putting her own dreams aside. She had loved him with a fierceness that only a mother could understand. But now, it felt as though that love had been thrown away, discarded like something insignificant. The rejection stung more than she cared to admit. It wasn't just the fact that he had called her a cleaner, though those words hurt deeply. It was the way he had dismissed her as if she were nothing more than a burden in his life. To him, she wasn't worthy of sharing in his joy, of witnessing the most important day of his life. She had never felt so invisible, so unimportant. It was as though the years they had spent together meant nothing to him now that he was about to start a new chapter with his wife. Sarah tried to distract herself. She threw herself into her work, cleaning houses, taking on extra shifts, and doing anything she could to avoid the painful thoughts swirling in her mind. She busied herself with the mundane tasks of daily life, hoping that the physical exertion would numb the emotional pain. But no matter how much she tried, the emptiness inside her remained. She would go to bed at night, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by John. Why had he turned on her so suddenly? Had she really done something wrong? Was her love for him not enough? These questions lingered in her mind, unanswered and painful. She didn't know how to fix the rift between them, didn't know how to make him see how much she had done for him. It wasn't just the pain of rejection that tore at her, but the confusion. Sarah couldn't understand why John, the son she had raised, could be so cold. She wondered if he had truly forgotten everything she had done for him. Had he forgotten the nights she stayed up late helping him with his homework? The times she comforted him when he had a bad day at school? The sacrifices she had made to ensure he never went without? How could he forget all of that so easily? The thought of not being there on his wedding day gnawed at her. She had always imagined being by his side, supporting him as he took this big step into adulthood. It was supposed to be a moment of joy and celebration, a moment when she could proudly stand beside her son and watch him marry the love of his life. But now, it felt like she was being shut out, excluded from the very thing she had dreamed of for so long. As the days passed, Sarah's heart grew heavier. She knew that she had to make a choice. She could either accept the rejection and walk away, or she could find the courage to fight for her place in his life. The decision wasn't easy. She knew that her relationship with John might never be the same again, that the bond they once shared might never fully heal. But she also knew that she couldn't let him marry without knowing the truth. She couldn't let him think that she was just a cleaner who didn't matter. With a deep breath, Sarah made up her mind. She would go to the wedding whether he invited her or not. She had given him everything. She had loved him through thick and thin. And she deserved to be there, to witness the next chapter of his life. No matter how painful it would be, she was determined to be there for him. She was his mother, and nothing could change that. The day of John's wedding arrived, and Sarah woke up with a heavy heart. The morning sun poured through the window, casting long shadows across the room. She had spent the last few days preparing herself mentally for what was to come. The rejection still lingered, but now she was determined. She dressed herself in the best clothes she had, a modest but elegant dress that she had saved for a special occasion. She had bought it years ago, hopeful that one day it would be worn at a celebration of her son's success. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the dress and smoothing out the wrinkles, Sarah's reflection stared back at her with a mix of emotions. Her heart was racing. She wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing by showing up uninvited, but one thing was certain. She could not stay home. She couldn't let him marry without knowing how much she loved him, without him seeing her. Standing there as his mother, proud and unwavering. Her hands trembled as she tied her shoes, the small act symbolizing the larger emotional journey she was about to take. She had already mentally prepared for the worst, that John might still be angry with her or that the guests might look at her as an intruder. But deep down, she knew she had to be there. She had given so much for him. She had never missed an important moment in his life, and she wasn't about to start now. Sarah took a deep breath, wiped a tear from her cheek, and left the house. The car ride to the wedding venue was long, each mile feeling like an eternity. Her mind was racing with possibilities. What would John say when he saw her? Would he ask her to leave? The fear and anxiety were almost overwhelming, but she pushed them aside. This wasn't about fear. This was about showing him that, no matter what, she would always be his mother. When she finally arrived at the venue, her heart skipped a beat. The building was grand, with elegant decorations, flower arrangements, and soft ambient lighting. It was everything John had ever dreamed of for his wedding day, everything Sarah had hoped for him. She paused for a moment at the entrance, her breath caught in her throat. The crowd was bustling inside, guests dressed in their finest clothes, laughing, chatting, and enjoying the beautiful atmosphere. The sound of a string quartet playing in the background only deepened the sense of grandeur and celebration. But Sarah didn't feel like part of that world. She felt like an outsider, someone who didn't belong in such a beautiful, polished setting. She hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, but then the thought of John's face flashed in her mind, and she knew she couldn't turn back. She straightened her posture, her resolve hardening, and stepped inside. The moment she entered, the room went quiet. Sarah could feel every eye turn toward her. She wasn't sure if it was because she was an uninvited guest or because of the sadness and vulnerability that was written all over her face. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was there. John was standing near the altar, his back to her, surrounded by the wedding party. When he turned and saw her standing in the doorway, his face immediately contorted in confusion, followed by anger. His eyes widened as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low but filled with emotion. The words stung, but Sarah stood firm, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm here because I'm your mother, John," she said softly, but with an undeniable strength in her voice. "I've always been here for you. I've always supported you, and I'm here now because I'm proud of you. I may not belong in your world of wealth and grandeur, but I belong in your life. I deserve to be here." The silence in the room deepened. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment. Every guest watching, every judgmental glance passing over her. She didn't care. She had lived through worse. The years of working hard, of giving up her own dreams for John, had prepared her for this. She had no fear left. This was her son, and she would not let him forget that. John looked at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. For a moment it seemed as though he might tell her to leave. His gaze flickered over her, as if searching for something, some indication that he was wrong, that he had made a mistake. But there was nothing in her eyes except love. And that love, Sarah knew, would always remain. It didn't matter what he said or did. She was his mother, and that was something that no one could take away. As the guests whispered amongst themselves, Sarah felt the sting of their judgment, but she refused to let it break her. She had made her decision, and she would stand by it, no matter what. Slowly, John walked toward her. He didn't say anything at first, but his steps faltered as he approached. When he finally reached her, the anger in his eyes began to soften, replaced by something else, something Sarah had longed for but never dared hope for: regret. John opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. Finally, after a long silence, he whispered, "Mom, I didn't mean it." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She simply nodded, her heart aching with the understanding that things might never be the same, but there was still time to heal. There was still time to make things right. And as they stood there together, both vulnerable and exposed, Sarah realized that the fight for her son's love and respect wasn't over. It had only just begun. The air in the room was thick with tension, But for the first time, Sarah didn't feel like an intruder. She wasn't just a mother who had shown up uninvited. She was a mother who had come to remind her son of the love that had always been there, no matter how much he might try to distance himself from it. As she stood in front of John, the silence between them stretched long, each second filled with an unspoken truth. Neither of them spoke at first. Neither of them knew what to say. John's eyes were filled with a storm of emotions: confusion, regret, and something else: fear. He hadn't expected this. His mother's unexpected appearance had thrown him off balance. He had thought that if he could just separate himself from her, if he could distance her from his life in some way, he would feel free. He was about to start a new chapter in his life with his bride, and he had wanted that chapter to begin without the weight of his past, without the woman who had raised him and always been there. But now, standing in front of him, his mother wasn't the angry, resentful figure he had expected. Instead, she stood with quiet strength, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and determination. There was no anger in her, no accusations, only an unyielding love that had endured through all of the years of sacrifice, all of the disappointments, and all of the moments when she had felt invisible. "Mom," John finally said, his voice breaking the silence. I didn't mean it. What I said? I don't even know why I said it. I was just angry." The words came out in a rush, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than to her. His mind was clouded with guilt, the realization that he had hurt the one person who had always stood by him, no matter how difficult things had been. Sarah could feel the weight of his words, but her heart wasn't ready to forgive just yet. It wasn't that she didn't want to forgive him. It was just that there was so much more to the situation than a simple apology could heal. She had raised him, sacrificed for him, and watched him grow into the man he was today. But somewhere, along the way, she had lost him, and the truth was that she didn't know how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. John's face was filled with regret now, his guilt written all over his features. He stepped closer to her, his voice softer this time. "I don't know when things changed between us, Mom. I don't know when I stopped seeing you for the person you are and started seeing you as something I wanted to forget. But I was wrong. I've been so focused on building this life, on making something of myself, that I've forgotten the most important part of who I am. You." The words cut through Sarah, but they also brought a strange comfort. She had never once doubted that he loved her. It was the way he had treated her that had made her feel invisible. He had chosen to put distance between them, and in doing so, he had forgotten that the very love he was seeking to build his future upon had come from the sacrifices she had made for him. His success, his happiness. They were born from the foundation she had built for him, brick by brick, through years of hard work and love. "I've spent so many years thinking I wasn't good enough," Sarah said, her voice low but steady. "Thinking that you saw me as just the woman who cleaned houses and worked herself to the bone to make sure you had what you needed. But I didn't do it because I wanted recognition. I did it because I loved you, John. I still do." John closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling over him. He had spent so long resenting the very things that had shaped him, the very woman who had made it all possible. He had seen her hard work, her dedication, as something beneath him, something to be ashamed of, when in reality, it was the backbone of his success. She had taught him everything he knew about sacrifice, about love, about resilience. and yet he had been too blind to see it. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice trembling. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm sorry. I've been selfish. I thought I could just erase the past, that I could build a life without having to face where I came from. But I was wrong. You've always been there for me, and I took that for granted." Sarah didn't know what to say at first. She had waited so long to hear those words from him, but now that they were spoken, she felt a mix of relief and sadness. The years of pain, of feeling unappreciated, couldn't be erased with an apology. But there was something in John's voice, something real and raw, that made her believe he understood. He wasn't the same person who had spoken those cruel words to her weeks ago. The man in front of her was someone who was beginning to understand the weight of his actions, someone who was finally seeing the truth that had always been there. "John," Sarah said softly, her hand reaching out to touch his, "it's not about whether or not you deserve my forgiveness. It's about us finding our way back to each other. I'm still your mother, and no matter what, that's something that can't be taken away." They stood there in silence for a long moment, both of them lost in their thoughts, in the unspoken truths that hung between them. It wasn't a perfect moment. There was still so much hurt to work through, so much to rebuild. But for the first time, Sarah felt like there was hope. There was hope that, in time, they could heal together, that the wounds of the past could begin to close. As Sarah looked at her son, she realized that this wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would both have to learn how to love each other in a way that acknowledged the past, but also moved beyond it. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like they were on the path to healing. Over the next few days, Sarah and John began to navigate the fragile terrain of their relationship. The wedding was behind them, but the emotional fallout from that day was only beginning to settle. John's apology had been heartfelt, but Sarah knew that words alone could not heal the wounds that had been inflicted over the years. Healing, she realized, would take time. It wasn't a matter of just forgiving him. It was about rebuilding trust, piece by piece, until they could find a way to move forward as mother and son once again. In the days following the wedding, Sarah took the time to reflect on everything that had happened. She spent long hours sitting by herself, thinking about her relationship with John, the sacrifices she had made, and the silent pain that had built up inside her over the years. She realized that her own expectations, too, had contributed to the distance between them. She had expected John to appreciate everything she had done for him, but she hadn't always communicated that to him in a way he could understand. And perhaps, in her own pain, she had failed to see that he was still just a young man, navigating a world that was vastly different from the one she had raised him in. Meanwhile, John was struggling with his own feelings of guilt and regret. He had never realized how much his words had hurt his mother until he saw the pain in her eyes. Growing up, he had always been focused on his own ambitions, his own success. He had believed that in order to escape his past, he needed to sever ties with it, to leave behind the life he had known. But in doing so, he had neglected the one person who had been there for him through it all, his mother. John found himself replaying his actions in his mind, trying to understand how he had arrived at such a painful place in their relationship. He realized that he had been running from his own insecurities, projecting his feelings of inadequacy onto Sarah. He had tried to distance himself from the life he had once known, not understanding that it was precisely that life, that sacrifice, that had made him who he was. The house they had lived in, the humble dinners, the late-night talks, they had all been building blocks of a love so deep that he had never truly appreciated it until now. The reconciliation between mother and son was not instantaneous. It was a slow, deliberate process where they both had to face the uncomfortable truths about themselves and each other. Sarah, for her part, had to confront the fact that she had allowed herself to be invisible in her own son's life, believing that he would one day realize the depth of her sacrifices without ever asking for acknowledgement. She had expected him to understand without speaking it aloud, without making her feel seen. But John had never been equipped with the tools to see her in that way. His world had always been about achievement and success, and somewhere along the way he had forgotten the most fundamental truth, that love wasn't something you earned through accomplishments. Love was something you gave, and sometimes it was something you fought for. For John, the road to reconciliation was not easy either. He had been ashamed of his past, ashamed of his mother's work, of the life they had led. But he had learned slowly that there was no shame in that. The pride he had felt in his achievements had been hollow, built on a foundation of forgetting the sacrifices others had made for him. He realized now that he had been ashamed of the very things that had shaped him into the man he had become. And to truly heal, he would need to learn to embrace those things, starting with his mother. They began to talk more, in the way they once had when John was younger. They shared stories, both painful and joyful, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she was truly heard. John didn't just apologize for his words. He began to show her, in his actions, that he understood her worth. He spent more time with her, asking about her day, helping around the house, and, most importantly, listening. He was no longer the distant man who had distanced himself from her love. He was the son she had always known, the one who had once needed her, without reservation. One evening, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table sipping her tea, John walked in and sat across from her. He looked at her with a softness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began. "About how you gave everything for me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully make up for how I treated you, but I want you to know that I see you now. I see everything you've done for me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. This was what she had needed all along. Acknowledgement, not just in words, but in actions. She had never asked for much, just for him to see her, to understand her love. And now, as she looked at her son, she realized that she could let go of the pain. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about understanding that they had both been lost, but they had found their way back to each other. "I love you, John," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'll always be here for you, no matter what." John nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I love you too, and I'm sorry for everything." In that moment, as the weight of the past began to lift, Sarah realized that their relationship had been forever changed. The path to healing was not a smooth one. It was jagged, full of missteps and painful realizations. But it was also a path that led to a deeper understanding of one another. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. And that, Sarah knew, was all that mattered. As they sat there together, a quiet understanding passed between them. They had come through the storm, and now they could begin to rebuild. It would take time, but for the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She had her son back, and that was worth everything. The days following their emotional reconciliation were not easy, but they were filled with hope. Sarah and John had started to rebuild their relationship, but the road ahead was still uncertain. The pain of the past couldn't be erased in an instant, but for the first time in years, both mother and son felt a glimmer of understanding, a seed of trust beginning to grow where once there had been only doubt and resentment. John, now more self-aware, had become intentional in his efforts to repair their bond. He began reaching out to Sarah more often, not just when it was convenient, but genuinely, trying to understand her life and her sacrifices. It was a slow process, one where small gestures spoke louder than words. He would ask her about her day, spend time helping around the house, and for the first time, he truly listened when she spoke. Sarah, for her part, had decided to let go of the weight of resentment that had built up over the years. She knew the road to healing wouldn't be quick, but she also understood that it was a journey they needed to take together. She stopped expecting grand gestures from John, realizing that small, sincere acts spoke volumes. She wasn't seeking grand recognition. She simply wanted to feel valued, and John was slowly learning to do that. But most importantly, they were talking more openly, something they hadn't done in years. One afternoon, after weeks of tentative conversations, John invited Sarah out for lunch. It was a small gesture, but to Sarah, it felt like a breakthrough. She had never asked him to do anything like this, never demanded to be treated in any special way. But here he was, extending a hand, offering her a space in his life again. It was the first time in a long while that Sarah felt a real sense of belonging with him. They sat across from each other at a quiet cafe, the hum of conversations around, them blending with the sound of soft music playing in the background. John, who had once been so distant, was now leaning forward, eager to engage with her. "I've been thinking," he said, breaking the silence, "about how much you did for me. All those years. I didn't even notice how hard it was for you. I just thought you were supposed to do it, you know? I didn't understand what it meant until now." Sarah smiled gently, her heart warmed by his words. She had waited so long to hear him acknowledge her sacrifices, but she hadn't known if it would ever come. "I didn't mind doing it, John," she replied softly. "I did it because I loved you. You were always my priority. But it's good to hear that you understand now." John looked down at his coffee, his face flushed with emotion. "I've always known you loved me, but I didn't realize how much you gave up for me. I guess I was too busy chasing my own dreams to really see you. But I want to change that. I want to be there for you, like you've always been there for me." As he spoke, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her chest. She had never expected him to fully repay the years of sacrifices she had made, but hearing him recognize her efforts brought a sense of closure that she had desperately needed. It wasn't about asking for validation. It was about knowing that, at last, her son understood the depth of her love. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the journey they had both taken to get here. She remembered the time when she would have done anything to keep John close, when she felt like he was slipping away, and her heart would break at the thought of him forgetting her. But now, there was a new understanding between them. John no longer saw her as a mere figure in his past. He saw her as a person, a mother, a woman who had sacrificed so much for him. And for Sarah, that recognition meant more than anything. Their lunch ended with a long embrace, and for the first time in a while, Sarah felt at peace. She didn't need to ask for anything more from John. He had already given her the most important thing: his acknowledgement, his understanding, and his love. A few weeks later, John invited Sarah to join him and his fiancée for dinner. It was the first time he had made a conscious effort to involve her in his new life, and Sarah could sense that this wasn't just a token gesture. He was inviting her back into his world, asking her to be part of the life he was now building. This simple invitation marked a new chapter, not just for John, but for their relationship. At the dinner, Sarah smiled as she watched John interact with his fiancée. There was no bitterness in her heart, no jealousy, just the quiet joy of knowing that her son was starting a new chapter with someone who made him happy. She had always wanted the best for him, and now it seemed like he was finding it, finding his place in the world, with love and support. As they all sat around the table, Sarah realized that it wasn't just about the apology or the moments of reconciliation. It was about the change that had taken root between them. Their bond was no longer about the mistakes of the past or the misunderstandings that had once separated them. It was about the present, about the love they shared, and about the future they could now build together. Sarah felt a peace settle in her heart that night, a peace that came from knowing she wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a person, a woman who had raised a son who now understood and appreciated her love. And as she looked around the table, at the people she cared about, she realized that this new beginning wasn't just for John. It was for both of them. They had come through a storm, and now they could walk side by side, stronger and more connected than ever before. The journey wasn't over, but it had only just begun. And Sarah was ready to take that next step, with John by her side.